Well, hello everyone, wherever you're listening from. This is Filtered, and my name is Phil Dye. And in this podcast, we look at the difficult social issues affecting Western society, families, parenting, growing up in Australia, the stuff that often a lot of the media don't talk about. And the belief here is the world is more than just a shop, so we'll be looking at really the non-commercial things. This podcast comes to you from the Illawarra area of Australia, which is in New South Wales, and a little town called Thirroul. And there'll be some Thirroul local voices on this and on some others as well. In the last episode, I spoke to child psychologist Clare Rowe about whatever happened to childhood. And this episode continues from there, where we look at the earlier teenage years. We looked at the younger years, but now we're going to look at those years from, say, 12 to 18, and what happens to teenagers as they're entering adulthood. Most teenagers have a difficult time of it. I did. I bet you did out there as well. Trying to juggle what is happening, trying to find your own identity, what you're good at, what you're not good at. I'll be talking to Clare Rowe again a little bit later, but I thought first off I'd talk to a high school principal about the problems that they found that young people experienced. Now, I'm fully aware that young people don't tell the school principal everything that they're worried about. What they're likely to do is tell the school principal and anyone about the things they think they should be worried about. Global warming, Indigenous recognition. I asked several groups of teenagers at bus stops what caused them anxiety, and they told me what they thought they should say, what an older person would like to hear. Things like this.
Pollution, and knowing that the world's eventually starting to deteriorate and getting destroyed by plastics.
Now, that's a pretty damn important thing for a 13-year-old to be concerned about. And good on him for even thinking about it at all. But there's a lot of personal issues that really do create anxiety in the teenage years. Issues that, as parents, we simply don't hear about. Mark Smith from the Illawarra was the school principal of a special school for many, many years. He brings a different perspective to it because he had to understand the personal issues that were happening in the lives of teenagers. Welcome, Mark.
Good morning, Phil.
Mark, I've heard you speak before how every teenager or adolescent or child really is an action research project. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, I would suggest that every adolescent, every student, every child is a walking, talking, breathing action research project of their very own, with only two questions. Look, firstly, an action research is a method of research where an individual actively engages in problem solving, in taking their own action and then reflecting on that and what happens as a result of their action to improve their situation.
So it's a bit like Plato's "where have I been and where am I going" thing.
Yes, that's essentially what an action research is. So when I say that each individual is an action research project, I mean that they are attempting to answer for themselves two questions. And the two questions that I think they ask themselves all the time, and this is an ongoing thing for them at every moment, and the two questions are, who am I and where do I fit in? Who am I and where do I fit in? And if they have satisfactory answers, they don't need to be perfect answers to who they are and what they're capable of doing and how they're validated for what they're able to do and where they fit in, who they hang out with and all of those things that make them feel like they belong. If they have satisfactory answers, then I think there's a good chance that things will be okay for them. in that moment, because, as I said, these are ever-changing circumstances that the adolescents, that the people go through, the young people go through, and those two questions are always in play every minute of the day. Who am I? Where do I fit in?
So, Mark, if they can't answer those questions, or they can't answer one of them, are they more likely to be anxious or concerned, or have some sort of unhealthy characteristics?
They will then go to various lengths, sometimes very extreme lengths, to find good answers to those questions. And sometimes where they fit in may not be, in the eyes of many, socially acceptable. And what they do to validate what they're capable of doing, their actions may not often be socially acceptable. But, paring back from that, it starts with being able to answer for themselves, or to be able to act on where they sit in a classroom, who they sit next to, who they play with, who they associate with out of the room or on the weekends. How many, for younger kids, how many play dates they get, how many times they're invited over to other people's places. It also is reflected in what they might wear. There's a great sense of belonging that comes from, a particular, unwritten law around the uniform that young people might wear, and even what they talk about and what music they listen to.
Mark, Jordan Peterson says that we form who we are by every single thing that we say, do, feel, be, which is really what you're saying, isn't it?
I think it is, Phil, and I think they're the live questions for those for young people, and I think for all of us, really. I think perhaps they're more on the surface, and because the quest for answers is more apparent and necessary for young people. We do see that they're always struggling with finding good answers to those questions, because they're always in play.
And those simple two questions, what are they again, Mark?
Who am I? Where do I fit in?
How often do parents and teachers guide that? Or should they?
I can't speak to how frequently they do that, because as teenagers grow, they find connections outside of the family, so that's important to allow that process as well. But there are things that we can do as adults to help that situation, to create the environment where students do find opportunities to fit in, do find opportunities to be validated for the things they're able to do. For instance, a shared experience in an outdoor adventure, whether it's canoeing or abseiling or bushwalking, or doing something together where the experience is something that, regardless of those questions, the young people are doing something together, and that becomes a shared experience that they have in common. So there are ways of bringing people together like that.
What about a sport, Mark? Like getting them into a sport where they play with others?
Or a sport, a team sport. They're sensational opportunities for students to find a way to answer both those questions at the same time. Find something that they belong to and find something that they're good at. And obviously coaches and teachers have a role in building that skill set. The nice thing about challenging students, and I think your example and mine, we both outlined something, a situation where students are challenged, is that you're often not just challenging their capabilities, you're challenging their imaginations about what they believe is possible for themselves. They learn a new skill, they learn how to kick a ball, they learn how to abseil, they learn how to paddle a canoe, whatever it might be. You've changed, even in a small way, how they see themselves. And sometimes it only takes a small shift in imagination, in imagining how they see themselves in the world and where they fit in and what they're capable of. It only takes a small shift in imagination to change other behaviours in a big way. And that's another way of saying they've got good answers to both of those questions.
Now, sport and outdoor activities, they're all positive ways, but what are the negative ways of answering who am I and where do I fit in?
Well, it is an action research project, so they'll try all opportunities to find answers, and sometimes that may be going to some extremes. The research around students who have struggled to fit in, for instance, outsiders, if you like, they've tried to find a group to belong to. It's not necessarily a good outcome for them. It seems that their way of attempting to belong to a group is to do the goofy things, the silly things, the extreme things, the dangerous things, and perhaps the unacceptable things, as a way of making themselves popular in a group, for instance.
Right.
The result, though, is not that they're accepted as an equal. They're accepted as the clown. They're accepted as somebody who, it's like a performance role that they've got. They're never really taken on as an equal to that group. They're just seen still as an outsider, but somebody who'll do that silly or dangerous things for the group. And that's where that research has tended to sort of point to.
Mark, what about the young person who can't find a group or who doesn't want to find a group? The teenager who'd rather spend time simply on their computer?
So I guess the real difficulties for people who aren't able to avail themselves of a group to belong to, and that's where, teachers need to have insight into students who aren't fitting in, and not just teachers, but the community, including the families and friends, that they have insight into where people are not fitting in and not seeing them being able to be confident in the things they do. And it comes out in a cautiousness sometimes. They're unwilling to try new things. And that's where, as adults in their lives, that we could have a role in supporting them build, if you like, their self-esteem and their sense of self-worth.
Mark, I remember, this must be 30 years ago, where you were doing outdoor education with primary school kids and high school kids. How important is that outdoor education in challenging them, in getting them a sense of identity and confidence?
Well, the outdoor education is also placing them in an environment which is not their real world. And so, if you like, you give them a clean slate, somewhere to start again, and to try to be someone, to be something, and be able to do things that aren't associated perhaps with the weight of their local streets and their community and their local friendship groups. So that's a really important avenue or opportunity that being in the outdoors can provide. It also provides opportunities for risk-taking, and outdoor educators will tell you that, the risk that people experience on an outdoor education activity is perceived risk, because outdoor educators are very good at ensuring that there's no genuine, real risk. So even within that realm of perceived risk, people are asked to confront that, to make decisions about what they do, whether sometimes it's a binary choice. I'm doing it or I'm not doing it. I will have a go or I won't have a go.
It boosts their resilience if they fail or if they don't do as well.
Every time they do something, they get an answer to one of those questions, or one of the myriad of offshoot questions about how they see themselves. And the other thing about being in a new environment, even if it is a wilderness environment, but not necessarily a complete wilderness environment, is that it's a level playing field. Everybody starts again. And you'll see, as I have done, I've seen students excel in part of wilderness environments, in some wilderness environments, and just not be able to cope with others. The broader range of activity and exposure to those activities in those environments you can provide, then the more likelihood there is of connecting each student with something that they feel good about doing, something they feel that they can achieve and feel capable, and learn a new skill along the way.
Mark, the next question revolves around mobile phones and teenagers. And last episode, there was a song by Danielle France from the Shellharbour area of New South Wales talking about this. I'll just play you an excerpt from the song, and we'll talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
I ain't asking just pushing buttons on their Apples and Samsungs. And that's the difference with you and me. You grew up without technology. And guys, don't ask me to dance, Grandma.
Yes, it seems everyone's pushing buttons on their Apples and Samsungs. The latest research says that Australian teenagers between 12 and 18 spend 4 hours per day on the weekend simply scrolling on social media, with TikTok being one of the main offenders. When you became principal of one of the schools you led, you banned mobile phones. Can you tell us how you did that and how it went?
Well, the policy within our system was about to come in that students weren't to have mobile phones on site, but we had preempted that by 6 months or so, and it was a struggle. I worked especially with students that experienced mental health issues and behaviour dysregulation. So suggesting to them that each day that they will not have access to their phone, it immediately caused an issue for them. We explained the reasons for that, that this was to help have some positive impacts on the way that they engage with the other students in the school, and to have some positive impacts on their learning. The way we went around it was to establish sets of of lockers, so they were not much bigger than a phone itself, but every student had their own locker. They would come and they would put that phone in. It had its own code, so only they would know the code, and that was the only way that we could tend to their anxiety about letting go of something that felt like an extension of their hand. That was the only way we could do it.
Did they ever try to come in, sneak in and use their code and grab their phone out?
They couldn't get to the area where the phones were kept. They were in executive office. But they certainly tried other things like bringing in burner phones or fake phones or dead phones. But that strategy doesn't last long, because you see them out on the playground with their phone. Yeah. So it's obvious that their attempt has lasted momentarily.
Right.
We had the support of the families. That was really important. And the option obviously was to leave the phones at home, but if they brought them in, they would have a safe place to leave them. But that changed, Phil. We did go through some, it was a struggle to start with. And definitely there was some confrontation, students with each other and with staff. But it didn't actually take long before they felt comfortable letting go of their phones. They would come and put them in the locker. And even that process changed until it got to the point where they were happy to put them in a container that was brought down to the assembly each morning. They would put them in, and they trusted us to lock them away and give them back at the end of the day. And that it was a demonstration that some habits, habits around the use of their phone could be changed in a very short period of time. Once they established that they could trust the people they were handing their phones over to, the way that they dealt with that changed very quickly. So it's really important to replace old habits with new habits, and the habit of putting that phone in was one that they came to in a fairly short period of time. So after a while, Phil, it just didn't become an issue at all.
Mark, you had success with that, and the students gained trust of the staff, which is really what teachers are after. Thanks so much for talking to us today, Mark.
Not at all, Phil. Anytime.
And that was Mark Smith, former outdoor education leader and school principal.
What was it like to have boys knock at your door? Did they drop off you flowers and leave letters on your porch? 'Cause some girls get these Snapchats and they just want to get in my drawers. Guys, don't ask me to dance, Grandma. They're just just pushing buttons on their Apples and Samsungs. And that's the difference with you and me. You grew up without technology. And guys, don't ask me to dance, Grandma.
Daniel France from the Shell Harbour area of the Illawarra with that song, Guys Don't Ask Me to Dance, Grandma. Now, one of the fascinating things that Mark said was that having a group is so important, having a group of friends that gave you an identity, and a sporting team is a great way of doing that, some sort of club, a church group, whatever it might be. And we know that while there's really positive groups, there's negative groups. There's gangs that adolescents can join. There's drugs that they can get into. They can go to Islamist fundamentalist groups. And social media is the main way that adolescents are recruited to these negative groups. Now, don't get me wrong, adults can be recruited to those negative things as well. Yet, the leaders of these groups know that young people, adolescents, especially vulnerable young people, are more susceptible to accepting their ideology. And one of the ideologies that have really targeted adolescents, teens and vulnerable teens in the last 25 years has been the gender ideology movement. A movement successfully using Snapchat in the early days and now TikTok to tell youth that they could have been born in the wrong body and that they can now change sex, which of course is biologically impossible. This movement has been so successful in pushing their views that they have achieved a 994% increase in young people identifying as trans or non-binary since 2020. I'll say it again, 994% increase in the number of kids who are stating or believing that they are trans or non-binary. This movement has leached its way into the school system, and while most parents and teachers think it's rubbish, there is a pressure for them to go along with it. Unfortunately, through the strong presence on TikTok, there are many young people now being affected by this movement. I thought I'd ask Clare, Rowe, child psychologist, why this has begun. How much is gender confusion a part of your work?
Well, it's become far more common, certainly over the last decade. Well, even the last couple of years, the last 5 years certainly. Once this was a very, very rare clinical presentation. Now, I would say it's almost expected, particularly in teenage girls, when you look at a high school cohort. Invariably, I mean, I've seen children in my clinic where, there's 3 others in the class that have gender dysphoria reportedly. So far more common, just explosion of these cases, particularly teenage girls exploring or identifying as trans or non-binary. The uptake cannot be of an organic cause, I don't think. That's social contagion happening right there in front of us.
So it's not naturally caused, it's not something that just emerges, it's something that has been socially generated.
Yes, through a number of factors. What was once a very rare clinical presentation, we now get clusters in the same friendship groups in schools and classes. We need to remember that gender dysphoria, which these kids are initially diagnosed with, is a mental health disorder. It is in our DSM.
And what's a DSM, Clare?
It is a book of mental health disorders that we can diagnose people with. Even that statement is becoming a bit controversial, but, at present day, gender dysphoria is a form of delusional disorder that is in our DSM as a mental health disorder. I like to make the point, though, as some of my colleagues do, it is the only disorder where at the moment the treatment of it is to encourage and lean into the disorder. And if you lean into the disorder and continue the child in pursuing those cognitions, those thoughts, and encourage them and validate them, then of course you, at some point, I don't quite know where, but at some point in time, you transition from gender dysphoria to trans, and then you're cured. You're no longer in the DSM. So transgender is not in the DSM. So it's a very murky area whereby we treat it unlike any other mental health disorder in the DSM. So this would be like leaning into someone presenting with an eating disorder and leaning into it, encouraging them to go further with it. So any other condition in the DSM we treat by cognitively challenging the patient. So we try to help them think with more kind of rational thinking. We try and give examples of how their thinking may be distorted in some way. We give them tools to emotionally regulate, to tolerate their distress that they're feeling.
And you look at why. You look at why the child has suddenly come up with this claim that they are not the sex that they were born with. I mean, it is a symptom of past experiences a lot of the time. Could be child sexual abuse, for example. Yeah.
There's can be lots of different reasons, and as there's mirrors, as we were talking before with ADHD and other things, about the lack of looking underneath and scratching the surface as to why this child has presented like this. I mean, I think we saw a spike in this just before COVID. It was, I think, around 2017 that I saw a marked spike in our practice. I think that's when schools started embedding a lot of this into the curriculum. I think social media exploded with influencer transition stories. And I think this, that I can talk to if you want, this affirmation treatment model became dominant in psychology and medicine.
But it just goes back to what you were talking about, that the child says that they are one thing, therefore we accept their opinion as an adult's opinion, whereas they're not an adult.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So this affirmation treatment model is at the moment still told to psychologists by the Australian Psychological Society as the gold standard of treatment for these children. So children come forward, and if they say that they are of the opposite sex, then as psychologists we are told we must affirm that. So we must acknowledge that, we must assist them if that's what they want to do in transitioning, at least socially, to be that other sex.
So that means the Australian Psychological Society, who we should trust as medical professionals, are working on a delusion. They're working on a lie, because children can't change sex. Humans can't change sex. It is completely bizarre. It's
a bizarre way that we've gone in treating children, in terms of them coming and saying something to us like that on this topic has lifelong, potentially irreversible kind of damage we're doing to kids if they do go down a medicalised route. And yet we are told not to question it because the 9, 10, 11-year-old knows best. There's just no other areas really, well, certainly in the history of medicine, that we would ever do that. It does align a little bit with a more general change in parenting, yes, an elevation of the child to more of an equal in the household, and as we were talking before, an elevation of giving them a little bit more control and power than they should have. So it does align with a cultural shift that way, with generally how we're raising kids. But this is to extremes. I mean, this is now looking at a child making decisions that, as I said, are not safe, not reversible, and entering into, a medicalised treatment route where you can't possibly say is informed consent, because, a 10 or 11-year-old can't possibly give informed consent in that way.
It's patient-led medicine gone too far.
100%. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and listeners
absolutely.
may not be aware that the Society of Plastic Surgeons have applied to make all gender transition surgery on Medicare. And an important phrase in their proposal was that the patient can choose their surgery. The doctor not only says, look, you don't need this, you need that, or no, the patient chooses whatever they'd like to have. To me, this is a tragedy, especially it's on the taxpayer dime.
Yeah, well, even if you put that aside, which is just fiscally a disaster. Yes, the idea of patient-led medicine, again, I think this is it to the extremes of harm of a generation. But medicine has gone a little bit more that way, sadly. Again, I think it's reflective of people coming and paying for an ADHD diagnosis, and they get or an autism diagnosis, and I think they can get quite cranky with a clinician like myself who says, hey, I don't think it's autism, I think it's something else. And so it is reflective on a little bit of a more general shift. But of course, now we're looking at something that is absolutely, lifelong, detrimental, awful impacts on people that they could and probably will grow to deeply regret in the future. So the removal of, evidence-based, science-led practitioners as experts is disastrous and very sad.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Claire, when I was 13, nearly 14, I pulled out all of my hair because I had a very traumatic family environment. Pulled it all out. Now, I knew I was pulling it out, but my mother took me to the doctor and I was too scared to actually say, oh, it's because this is what's happening at home. So the doctor gave me cream that I had to rub on my head the whole time. But the doctor never, I think he did know that there was a lot of shit going on at home, but never actually looked at that. No, let's put on some cream, which is a bit like, let's try some puberty blockers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's the problem, is this medicalised path, it just flies in the face of any other way that we should be working. I mean, even on a general psychotherapy or psychology approach should be one of exploration, because as you pointed out and alluded to before, there are so many reasons why these kids are displaying like this. As you said, it might be a history of abuse. It might just be a history of not fitting in, to be honest. It might not even be as extreme as abuse, but it might be a completely normal 12, 13-year-old struggling with their identity. And hey, that's what happens at 12 and 13. They struggle. And so what they do is they find an online forum and a group who accepts them and says, hey, you're one of us. This is what it might be. And it feels good. It feels good. I mean, I'm not also blaming the child in this. I mean, they think, okay, well, maybe this is the problem. It could be that they're struggling with same-sex attracted feelings. It could be that they want to break away from mum and dad, and I've seen children who want, once they come out and say that they're experiencing these dysphoric feelings and distress, get a lot of love and reinforcement and attention from mum and dad that they may not have had before, struggling with siblings and so forth. So there's lots of reasons. It's not one. Certainly, as you would know, Phil, in this area, we've got this rise of this group that are what we call late onset, and that is kids, a lot of them female, who parents say, we haven't seen any signs of this before. They've never said anything about their history of gender distress, and they're coming to us at 12 years old as soon as puberty is kind of coming on, and have now said they want to be a boy.
So this late onset gender dysphoria, it's a sudden thing that parents have not seen before.
Very different groups.
How often is this sudden, this late onset stuff driven by a parent? Perhaps a parent's desire to be cool in a group?
It can be for different reasons. I think some parents are driving the train, so to speak, and sometimes without realising it. I think in some cases it comes from a place of unresolved grief. There is such thing as having gender grief over, fourth child was another fourth boy. And sometimes you can unwittingly play into, an untapped grief that I wanted a girl.
Yeah, I can sort of understand that, although it's sad. But what I'm talking about is the parents who want to seem like they're keeping up with the trend, what's happening in popular culture.
There can be parents who want to appear progressive and accepting. You know what I really gets me with all of this, Phil, is that they're often scared and they're desperate to do the right thing. And they are bombarded with messages around the high suicide rates of trans kids. And if you don't help them transition, you are a bad parent and you're putting your child at risk. And I just think that that's appalling, that parents are simply trying to follow sometimes what they view as experts, and they've been completely led astray. When you're sitting in front of someone in a white coat and they are giving you alarming statistics about suicide and mental illness and then directing you towards gender clinics and counsellors, etc., you do it. You think, well, okay, this is my child and these are what the medical experts are telling me to do.
But the research doesn't back up the suicide thing, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But they're not told that. And that's why, the whole thing is all around this misinformed information to parents and misinformed consent. It is not proper consent that they enter this medicalised path. And I'm sure you know as well as I that we know parents have been said literally things like, would you rather have a trans child or a dead child? I mean, that is horrific. Extremely manipulative.
And what parent drives this, or is more willing to believe the whole gender ideology thing? Is it mum or dad?
I do think there are some more complex, quieter cases. I think they usually involve mothers where, as I said, gender distress can emerge. And I think there are some parents who are pushing their own progressive agendas, or, you do get parents who come out almost quite proud that they've got a gender dysphoric or trans child. And I think, why would you wish that on anyone? I mean, that's,
They're in a minority though, aren't they, Claire, those parents?
Yeah, I was about to say, I think they're a minority. I really do. For the vast bulk of parents, I think they're really just trying to do the right thing in a very difficult situation and are not being given the right guidance by professionals.
I'm gathering that you wouldn't suggest that a parent takes their child to a gender clinician then, not to a gender clinic. You wouldn't be suggesting that?
I think it's rarely, if ever, a good idea. Certainly not for a first step when a child initially expresses confusion about their gender. Absolutely not. And that's because these clinics have been built on this affirmation-only model, which means the moment a young person says, I think I might be trans, the system is designed to agree and support that identity without, as we said, looking at other causes. Which would be, and I keep coming back to, there is a small proportion of humans that experience lifelong gender distress, but the way we approach any person presenting with a mental health issue, a physical issue, if you go to the doctor with physical symptoms, is by looking at all the different possibilities and ruling things out. And that is not the way these clinics go about things. As soon as you say that you have an issue with gender dysphoria, or I think I'm trans, it's like we just put complete blinkers on. And the fact that you have any trauma in your background, the fact that you're on the autistic spectrum, the fact that, your parents are going through a highly litigious divorce is ignored.
So just say no to the gender clinic.
I'm saying no to the gender clinic, and I've been under, as colleagues have been of mine, under attack for that. Certainly my views in that don't align with the way our regulatory bodies want us to be thinking and talking about this.
And it's a great shame that our regulatory bodies, like the Australian Society of Psychotherapists, for example, or psychologists, advise the government, but they're being overly progressive and taking advice from the wrong people. I think parents have got to understand that.
I think for parents who don't know about this stuff, affirming the child and telling them that it's okay and helping them align with the sex they want to be. Look, it might sound kind on the surface, but it just bypasses all the work that clinicians are supposed to do. Unpack underlying distress, unpack personal and family history. And so, look, I've got serious concerns about these gender clinics. They don't seem to ever provide any differential pathways other than putting kids on this one track to a medicalised intervention.
Now, Claire, I know there's lots of teachers listening to this, and I think teachers are in a really hard place because the departments of education really across the country saying, you've got to affirm the child's gender if they believe that they're in a different sex, and you've got to go along with that. And many teachers think that this is just a lot of crap, but they can't do anything, and they have to go along with the parent if the parent wants them to go along with that. How does someone deal with this in that situation professionally? They have to go along with it, don't they?
Well, in a lot of cases, I think they do, and I really have a lot of empathy for teachers who struggle with this. Just to take one step back, first and foremost, you should not be calling a child by any other name or gender pronoun without parental permission. I mean, that's even one step prior to parents encouraging this. And I have heard of those cases that parents have said, we do not wish for you to be calling our child a different name, and yet the school pursues it. Now, if you're a teacher in an employed position, who am I to say, or anyone else, that you should stand up and risk your employment over this? So I certainly can't say that either. It's a very, very difficult situation to be in.
It is hard, isn't it? And of course, the Teachers Union is supporting this as well.
I think it's particularly hard if you have parents who are requesting that the pronouns be changed and the name be changed. At the end of the day, as a teacher, you're there to teach, and I would say, you focus on that, because the issue therefore is really heading back to parents and the parental right to be able to say that that's what they want their child to be called. It comes back to actually educating and dealing with the parents who are making those decisions, who, as I said before, are getting the advice from ill-informed medical experts. As a teacher, there's not a lot you can do if the parents are supportive of that.
Except for teachers, I'm sorry, you can leave the profession. You can go to another job, and I know there's many teachers out there who have done that because of this very issue. Claire, some university teaching courses and some schools are telling the teachers that they cannot say no to a student, that they cannot use wrong and right. They can't tell a student that is wrong. Is it bad to say those things?
Oh, of course it's not. I gave myself a wonderful interview to, I don't know if you've heard of her, Catherine Burblesing.
Oh, yes, Catherine from the Michaela School.
Yes.
I interviewed her too. She's terrific.
She is terrific. I would encourage anyone to look her up. There are lots and lots of YouTube interviews with this woman. And she has started a school in the inner west area of London, a very low social and economic area, mostly of black students who come from backgrounds of never having family members go to tertiary education or finish high school. Anyway, she has returned a schooling education model back to a very traditional one where it is teacher-led learning, it is explicit teaching, it is rote learning, it's detentions, it is desks in rows facing forward, no more kind of collaborative, so much emphasis on student collaborative work of self-discovery and, student-led learning. And she's just had her first cohort go through and complete the equivalent of Year 12, and I think they came out ranked as the 7th best results in the country. But this was from a school of kids who weren't expecting to finish high school. I mean, absolutely extraordinary results. I think she has thousands of visitors come through the school every year because people want to know, what are you doing in here? And more than that, she has the lowest rate of teachers leaving her school. The teachers love teaching there, and the students love going. They're engaged. They're putting their hand up and they're engaged. And that
I've been to the school, Clare, and it is absolutely marvellous. The kids in the class are so keen. They're really keen.
And that's because they have been given that structure. They know when they walk into that school who's in charge, and therefore they relax and they're not vying for control. And that's what kids want. And so as a teaching profession, we need to return to that teacher-led learning. And the other thing I would say to teachers that I love from Catherine Berbelsing is not to lower expectations all the time for children. We have this enormous culture of accommodations with children, and if you can make a case, quite a brief case, that you've come from some disadvantaged background, or you have anxiety, or you have a parent with a mental health condition,
or you're neurodiverse,
then the school system in Australia is set up to make accommodations for you, whether that literally be you don't have to sit the exam, you get extra time, we're not going to expect as much from you. And one of the things we need to do is get rid of that and hold up expectations for every child at the same level. It's not fair to lower our expectations on a child because they will meet those lower expectations. And if you raise the bar, they will meet a higher expectation. And so I love that philosophy as well for teachers, not to buy into this absolute culture we have of over accommodations.
Clare, it's been great talking to you. How can people get in contact with you if they need to?
Look, they can just look me up online at Clare Rowe. It's without the I, so Clare, clarerowe.com.au.
And I'll put a link to that too in all the episode notes. Clare, thanks so much for talking with us.
Wonderful. Thanks, Phil. It's been great.
And that was Clare Rowe, child psychologist from Sydney, Australia. Now, if you've got any questions or any comments, send them in to me, phil@filtered.com.au, phil@filtered.com.au, and that's PHILTERED, and I'll see if I can get them answered for you. Thanks for joining me in this episode. Thank you to Mark, thanks to Clare, and I'd really appreciate it if you could share this episode with friends or family who may find it interesting. My name is Phil Dye. I'll see you again soon.